do you see, because Jesus sustains us, Jesus works these things together.
That's all right.
And so what Jesus is saying, listen, all of you are here because you're either hungry, you're sad, you're happy, whatever the heck it's going to be, but you don't know me. And so Jesus at that point doing them a favor, saying, listen, let's not waste any more time here, because when you come to me in heaven and you knock on the door, I still don't know you because you don't know me. Let me do you a favor. Let me get you mad. Let me get you freaked out. Let me let you go home and you think about what you just said, noted. And so Jesus comes in and says, drink my blood, eat my flesh, because he meant it. They weren't connecting the dots and saying, listen, Jesus is the Word made flesh. It had always been. Chew on it. Jesus, unless you partake in the fact that blood must be shed in order sins to be forgiven, you have to be a part of that. That's what Jesus is saying, right? But he says it in a way that absolutely irritates them, and they don't care. They don't want to be a part of this thing, because you know what? It's interesting what they say. It says, on hearing it, this is their words. This is where we would be, right? In hearing it, many of his disciples said, this is a hard teaching. Who can accept it? Are you with me? Who can accept this bullcrap? I mean, are you kidding me? How am I supposed to accept this? Everything in my religious behavior says that is wrong. And that's where we camp. Yeah.
Why religious behavior when he talks about the Spirit? Do they have any background about the Spirit? Well, like he says, you really eat my flesh and you really drink my blood, but he's talking in the Spirit, and they don't know it.
We haven't take it.
I wouldn't.
I think he's talking about it.
Yeah, but I wouldn't have accepted Christ this way. I got it in a way, calmer way. Like,
yeah. Well, you see where he's trying to get, and Reiner, you're not wrong. The deal is he's speaking to them in a way, he's trying to bring them back, but their religious buildup of don't do this, don't do this, live holy, keep all the laws, wear your purple gown, all those different things that got in the way. So he used it against them, is the way I'm perceiving it.
Okay.
And so soon we're going to see that he was talking to them in the Spirit. These things are in the Spirit.
Yeah.
So they don't know that yet. They should know that, but they don't. Remember, Jesus comes up to the guy and he says, you're the teacher of Israel, Nicodemus, and yet you don't understand you have to be born again? Born again is a spiritual thing. You can't jump back into your mom's womb. You can't chew on Jesus' leg, right? You can't take a cup of his blood. And certainly, there's the whole denominational perspective that when the bread actually becomes Jesus' body and the blood, and the wine becomes blood. I would not agree with that personally, but you guys can camp where you want with that. Nonetheless, says Jesus says, do this in remembrance of me, right? And certainly as you look at the Last Supper, it was much different than I think we think today. So you can look at that how you want. I'm not here to split sides. You can do what you wish. But ultimately, Jesus is saying this in the spiritual perspective, just like he said, unless you're born again. If you want to come and make it natural, you can do that. But that's not what he's saying. He's saying, listen, you must be born again. Okay. So on hearing it, many of his disciples said, this is a hard teaching. Who can accept it? Aware that his disciples were grumbling about this. Whose disciples? Who are we talking about?
Jesus' disciples.
How many? We're not talking about the 12 here. There's a bunch of people that consider themselves disciples, and Jesus is considering themselves disciples as well. So remember, your disciples don't have to be Christians. I know that's probably hard for a lot of you guys to consider. But when you recognize a lot of the 12 didn't even understand who Jesus was until after he rose again. Jesus considered them disciples. He's discipling them in what? Who Jesus is, who he is, right? And so when you are walking around with other people, I have many people I disciple, and they're not believers. I disciple them on a regular basis because I'm teaching them who Jesus is, hoping that one day they will get it, right? And Jesus is the same thing here. These people, check it out. Aware that his disciples were grumbling about this, Jesus said to them, does this offend you? You think? What if you see the Son of Man ascending to where he was before? That's going to be pretty hectic, right? It says, the Spirit gives life, the flesh counts for nothing, right? The words I have spoken to you are spirit. And this is where Reiner was going, because you read ahead and you're a cheater. The words I have spoken to you are spirit, and they are life, right? They are life. Yet there are some of you who do not believe, for Jesus had known from the beginning which of them did not believe. Sorry, let me make sure I get this right. I'm always like an actual word stickler. For Jesus had known from the beginning which of them did not believe and would betray him. He went on to say, "This is why I told you that no one can come to me unless the Father has enabled him." Right? From this time, many of his disciples turned back and no longer followed him. Right? Jesus is considering quite a few of these people that are he's discipling them. He's considering them disciples, and yet they're not believers. They're not understanding these things. These words are hard. They're there for many, many reasons, and in my opinion, almost every reason's okay. Right? Because we have this growth thing with God. I mean, some of us come because Jesus is cool. Some of us come because we're broken. Some of us come because someone we know is broken. Whatever it is, it's just we come and Jesus is wanting us to go further. And then when Jesus gives you some tough love, you hit the road running. Right? And it's funny because these people couldn't hear this anymore. And he's saying, listen, I'm speaking to you in the Spirit. These things are spirit. No different than Nicodemus. And he says, he went on to say, "This is why I told you that no one can come to me unless the Father has enabled him." So this perspective of these people hearing these words and not willing to accept them. You know what I'm saying? And so I know there's perspectives to where we think that God does all the work, and yet God gives us no choice. And that's tough because it doesn't mesh with the whole entire Old Testament story that Jesus is speaking. Jesus has just literally dissected this whole entire time back in history of, listen, all of you are busted. Look upon this thing, and you will be saved. So, from this time, many of his disciples turned back and no longer followed him. And I love Jesus as he I always kind of picture my own little movies. I'm looking at the Mass, and Jesus has got his boys over here, and he just turns around and goes, "What, you want some too?" Now, this is great. He says, "You don't want to leave too, do you?" Right? Do you want to participate in this thing? And I love this story because 2 nights ago, my wife and I tried to break Judas out of hell. All right? You ever try to just get Judas out of hell? You're thinking, man, I know, you know what, everybody's told me he went to hell, and it just seems like there's so much scriptural basis. So my wife and I are up to like 11-something. I'd already fallen asleep and woke up, and I came in the room, I was like, "What are you doing?" She goes, "I'm trying to get Judas out of hell." And how can you say no to that, right? So I got my computer on, and I'm trying to get Judas out of hell. Like I'm like a full lawyer. I'm just like, well, clearly, you know. And so anyway, I'm arguing with my wife about it. I'm like, clearly, no. And she's like, well, she's smacking me around. So it's interesting because out of the gnarliest things Jesus has ever said, who decides to go with him? Judas. One of his 12. All 12, right? Peter spoke to them. He says, Simon Peter answered him, "Lord, to whom shall we go?" Peter could have said that, and the other 11 could have took off, right? We have Philip, who's Mr. Quiet. He's like, I don't even know what to say, You have Judas thinking, you know what? Jesus is probably rich. I know he probably doesn't handle money, but if Jesus came in our town, you know how many people would want to just cart him around and say, "Jesus, is there anything I can do for you? I got like $60 bazillion. I haven't tithed in like 8 years. Can I just give that to you?" You know what I'm saying? So we know that these wealthy women funded Jesus, and they funded these things he was doing, and there seems to be never a need, and he's always able to do all these things. I'm thinking Judas is probably sitting on the money going, "This is great." Maybe he wants to get rich, right? Maybe he's thinking about it. Maybe there's a part of him that's wondering, is this the Messiah? Right? Because you'll notice one thing, Jesus knew Judas, but it seems like the scriptures never mention Judas. It doesn't say, "and Judas will deny me." It says, right here, it says,
He knew which would.
what's that?
It says he knew who would betray him.
He knew who would betray him, and then also in another spot it says he knew Judas's heart on the whole thing. But I always try to give Judas this fun perspective of wondering, one of the 12 would blow it. Who's it going to be? And the only reason I think that is because when they're sitting